I worked as an app delivery man for a few months, and I've already taken strange orders, but none comes close to what I experienced that summer night. It was almost midnight when I received a simple delivery, a gallon of milk. I thought it was unusual to ask for this at this time, but I accepted because the payment was good and the route didn't seem so far away. The GPS took me to an almost deserted dirt road, away from the city's illuminated streets. With each kilometer, the cell phone signal became weaker, and the silence of the road made me restless. When I finally arrived at my destination, I found a lonely trailer, illuminated only by a weak lamp on the door. There were no other cars, no noise from people, just that point of light in the middle of the darkness. I parked the car in front and took the gallon of milk. Before even knocking on the door, it opened slowly and a man appeared. There was not even time to see the right face, because he pulled the package from my hand quickly, almost abruptly, and disappeared inside without saying anything. The door slammed soon after, leaving only the dim light illuminating the entrance of the trailer. I went back to the car trying not to think too much, but something didn't seem right. I started the engine, ready to leave, when I heard a noise coming from the surrounding bust. At first I thought it was the wind, until I noticed several eyes shining reflecting the light of the headlights. In a matter of seconds, a pack of dogs began to run towards me, advancing through the gravel with growls that echoed at night. I accelerated before even putting on the belt, feeling the wheels skid on the fluffy earth. The dogs surrounded the car in seconds, hitting the doors and barking as if they wanted to pull me out of there. One of them even climbed on the hood, scratching the windshield glass hard. I stepped on the accelerator as much as I could, trying to keep control on the narrow and irregular road. When I finally gained enough speed, I saw through the rearview mirror the silhouettes of the animals decreasing, but still running after me for a few meters. The noise of the bars only disappeared when I was already far from the trailer, back to the asphalt. Even so, my hands kept shaking on the steering wheel, and the feeling that those bright eyes were still following me didn't leave my head. I slowed down only when I reached an illuminated gas station, still trying to catch my breath. I stopped the car and took a few minutes of deep breath, trying to understand what had just happened. I checked the application to check the order, and everything seemed normal. The address, the time, and the payment. But the delivery sheet did not show the customer's name, only a blank space. I thought about reporting what happened to the app support, but what would I say? That I went to deliver milk at midnight in a lost trailer and was almost attacked by a pack. I ended up letting it go, but the scene didn't leave my head. The man pulling the gallon without looking at me, the dogs appearing out of nowhere, and especially the detail that there was nothing but that trailer at the end of the road. The next morning, I tried to find the address again in the app, but it just didn't appear anymore. Not even in the route histories could I locate the same point. It was as if the delivery had been erased, leaving only the memory of that dawn. This detail made me even more uncomfortable, because it proved that it wasn't just my paranoia. Something was wrong from the beginning. I told the story to some friends, and most laughed, saying that it was probably just some eccentric customer, and that the dogs could be from the region. But those who have worked with delivery know that orders are always registered, and that an address does not disappear out of nowhere. As much as I tried to find a logical explanation, the feeling I was left is that I should never have accepted that race. To this day, every time I enter a dirt road at night, I remember that trailer illuminated by a single lamp. I never accepted strange requests at dawn, especially when they appear with isolated routes. The sound of the dogs running after the car still echoes in my head, as if they were chasing me to this day. I don't know who the man who pulled the gallon was or why he needed milk at midnight, but I'm sure that place wasn't a simple delivery address. Maybe I came across something I shouldn't have. And you, would you agree to stop at an isolated trailer at the end of the road to make a delivery during the night? I worked for a while delivering pizza, and one night I was called to a neighborhood that seemed super quiet, full of well-kept and bright houses. It seemed more like one of those places where nothing strange could happen. When I arrived at the house indicated by the app, I saw that there was no one waiting for me at the door, but I soon noticed a ticket stuck in the slot. The message was short and direct. The money is under the carpet. I found it a little strange, but not unusual. It had already happened that customers left the payment hidden when they didn't want to have contact. But when I lowered myself to lift the carpet, I noticed something grotesque coming out slowly through the opening of the door, right next to my hand. It was fast, but enough to make me let go of the pizza box and run back to the car without looking back. I got into the car so fast that I barely closed the door right. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking so long that it took me to start the engine. The worst thing is that I couldn't explain exactly what I had seen. It didn't look like a normal hand, nor a falling object. It was something strange, deformed, that stretched through the opening as if trying to reach the outside. Just remembering, I feel the same chill running through my body. I looked through the rearview mirror and saw the pizza box still fallen on the balcony, intact, but I didn't have the courage to go back to get it. The house seemed silent and dark, without any sign of movement, but the image of that leaving the door did not leave my head. It seemed impossible that someone had written the note so calmly, and at the same time, left it there waiting for me. I started and left that street as fast as I could, but even after a few blocks, I was still looking through the rearview mirror, afraid of seeing something following me. When I reached a busier intersection, I stopped to breathe and try to organize my thoughts. I kept repeating in my head what I had seen, trying to give a logical explanation, but nothing fit. The more I thought, the clearer it became that what appeared in that route was not human. On the way back to the pizzeria, I kept rehearsing what I was going to tell the manager. But how to explain without seeming that I had invented everything? In the end, he only said that the customer did not show up to pick up the order. The manager sighed and ordered to play at a loss. Inside, I was grateful for not being questioned more deeply, because there was no way to put into words what had happened on that balcony. That night I almost couldn't sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I remembered the note written so calmly, and that stretching through the doorway. It didn't seem to be just a shadow or illusion caused by light. It was solid, grotesque, as if it was really trying to get out. The detail that bothered me the most was the way it moved, slow, but intentional, as if he knew I was there. In the following days, I avoided accepting deliveries in that region as much as possible. Just seeing orders with nearby streets, I refused immediately. I didn't tell my colleagues anything, because I knew they would laugh or call me fearful. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been imagination. That was there waiting behind that door, and if I had taken a few more seconds, maybe I would have seen much more than I should. To this day I can't understand who really wrote that note or what the intention was. The house is still on the app, but I never had the courage to accept orders for that address again. Whenever I go through similar streets, I instinctively look at the doors, as if I expected to see another ticket stuck, ready to attract me too close. I never picked up an order without thinking twice. The image of that opening, and what I saw coming out of there still haunts me, because I feel it was only a small part of something much worse hidden behind that door. And you, would you have the courage to lower yourself and look under a carpet after finding a note like that? For a while, I worked in a fast food chain making deliveries at night to supplement the income. Most of the routes were quiet, but in one of them something happened that I could never forget. I arrived at a simple house, left the order on the balcony, and knocked on the door, as I always did. I was already turning to leave when I heard a scream coming from inside. The voice was that of a woman desperate, and in English she shouted, "Get off me!" It was so loud and so real that I froze on the sidewalk. It didn't seem like an ordinary discussion. It looked like someone really in danger. My heart raced, and my first reaction was to look around to see if there were neighbors, but the street was completely empty, too quiet for that kind of scream. Without thinking twice, I took my cell phone and called the police. I quickly explained what I had heard and the address where I was, and they told me to wait outside until the car arrived. Meanwhile, I stood on the street, staring at the door of the house, with the feeling that at any moment someone could run out of there. But nothing happened, only the heavy silence after that scream. It was the longest minutes of my life until the car hit. 2 policemen left quickly, knocked on the door, and then forced the entrance. I stayed on the other side of the street, motionless, without the courage to approach. Shortly after, I heard the doors slamming inside, hurried steps and more noise coming from the house. And then, suddenly, everything went silent again. I expected to hear someone being removed, some movement that indicated that they had found the woman, but nothing happened. The police remained inside for a few minutes, until one of them came out and called me to confirm if I had really heard the scream. I told you exactly what happened, but I realized that they avoided giving details of what they had seen inside. They just said it was under control. Even so, I couldn't stop looking at that house. The windows were dark, and the front door was ajar after the police entered. That gave the impression that something could still come out of there at any moment. The silence that took over the street after the noise of the doors slamming was the kind of silence that sticks to the memory, heavy, suffocating. I went back to the car and stayed there, without the courage to start the engine. I wanted to believe that the police had solved the situation, but the absence of any sign of movement made me even more nervous. No one entered, no one left, and no extra car showed up. It was as if what had happened inside had been muffled at the same moment it started. After some time, the two policemen left and closed the door with force. They came to me, asked once again if I was sure of what I heard, and, when I confirmed, they just thanked me and released me to leave. They didn't explain anything, they didn't comment if they found someone, or if there was real danger. It was as if that scream had disappeared along with the noise inside the house. I drove away trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing by calling the police, but the feeling of emptiness wouldn't let me. The sound of the woman screaming, "Get off me!" It didn't get out of my head. He seemed so real, so desperate, that it was impossible to believe that he had left no traces. At the same time, the silence that came next was so absolute that it gave me the impression that something had been erased on purpose. In the following days, I became obsessed with looking for news from that street. I checked local newspapers, online groups, any mention of any occurrence. I didn't find anything. No police note, no report from neighbors, nothing that explained what I had witnessed. The address seemed to have returned to normal, as if nothing had happened there. To this day, I don't know if that woman really got help or if something much worse happened after silence took over the house. What haunts me is that I was the only person on that street to hear that scream, and the police never said anything about what they found. I keep wondering if I should have done more, or if I simply witnessed something I should never have heard. Whenever I pass by silent houses during deliveries, I remember that night. The balcony with the request dropped, the desperate scream, and the suffocating silence after the arrival of the police. Maybe I'll never find out the truth, but I'm sure I didn't imagine anything. And you, what would you do if you heard someone desperately asking for help from inside a house, and then everything went silent? On a Saturday morning, I ordered food through the app, as I always did when I arrived late from work. It was almost 1 in the morning when the delivery arrived. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a delivery man who seemed altered, with a strong smell of narcotic in the air. His way already made me uncomfortable immediately, but I tried to act normally, took the bag and thanked him. That's when I realized the situation getting strange. He looked at the cell phone screen, then at me, and asked if I had left a tip in the app. I said no, and he simply stood still, staring at me, repeating in a low voice that I owed something. The tone was not a joke. It was serious, uncomfortable, and the way he remained motionless at the door left me completely unresponsive. I managed to gather courage to close the door slowly, but he didn't move. I stood behind the locked door for a few seconds, listening to his breathing on the other side. Soon after, the steps began on the balcony. He walked from one side to the other, as if he was waiting for me to open it again. Each pop of the wood under his feet made my heart race even more. I took my cell phone and was ready to call the police, but I didn't know what exactly to say. He hadn't attacked me, but the situation was clearly threatening. I waited a few minutes, trying not to make noise, while the steps continued to circulate. Sometimes he stopped, and I could feel that he was standing right in front of my door. It was almost 10 minutes in this waiting game, until I finally heard the sound of the paper bag being kicked against the balcony wall. That made me jump in fright, but at the same time it seemed like a sign that he was leaving. I waited a few more seconds, and the steps began to move away slowly, until they disappeared completely. Even so, I didn't have the courage to look out the window to confirm. I locked all the extra locks and sat on the living room floor, motionless, still holding my cell phone. The clock didn't seem to work, and with every car that passed on the street I held my breath, afraid that it was him coming back. I was only able to relax a little after almost an hour, when absolute silence took over again. The next morning, I found the sharp marks of footprints on the balcony, going from one side to the other, exactly as I had heard. The crumpled bag was fallen in the corner, confirming that he had really kicked before leaving. Just seeing that gave me a chill, because it proved that it wasn't paranoia of my head. He had stood there, wandering the door for several minutes. I entered the application to register the occurrence, and asked them not to send that delivery man to my house anymore. I wrote the report as detailed as possible, but I never had a concrete answer. They just said they were going to investigate. Since then, I avoid ordering food at dawn, especially when I'm alone. The memory of that figure standing on my door still accompanies me every time I hear footsteps on the balcony at night. To this day, I don't know what that delivery man really wanted, or how far he would be willing to go. Maybe it was just intimidation, maybe something worse. What scares me is to think that if I had hesitated a few more seconds to close the door, he could have forced entry. It was one of the few times I really felt afraid inside my own house. I could never open the door for a delivery without first checking 2 or 3 times who was on the other side. It may seem exaggerated, but that dawn showed me how simple situations can become dangerous in seconds. And you, what would you do if someone stood on your balcony repeating that you owe something? That night I just wanted something simple for dinner, so I ordered a sandwich through the app. It was a small order, nothing out of the ordinary. When the delivery notification arrived, I went to the door and came across several bags full of food. There were so many packages that it seemed like an order for 4 people, and not for someone alone like me. At the time I thought the delivery man had gotten confused, so I called the app support to report the error. That's when it got even stranger. The attendant confirmed that the order had left exactly my account, with the same address and the same data. There was no wrong order registration, much less of someone having used my data. I kept trying to understand how that was possible. I reviewed the order history, and there was recorded exactly what had been delivered. Several full meals, nothing like the sandwich I remembered choosing. I even thought I had clicked wrong, but it didn't make sense. The value was high, and I would never have confirmed a purchase like that without realizing it. In the end, I ended up keeping most of the food in the fridge and left it to be solved later. I tried to forget the subject, but at night I was woken up by the sound of the doorbell ringing repeatedly. They were short, insistent touches, as if someone wanted me to open the door anyway. I got up slowly, still sleepy, and went to the entrance to look. When I opened the window curtain that faced the balcony, there was no one. The space was completely empty, illuminated only by the street pole. Even so, the doorbell kept ringing, as if someone invisible was pressing the button. I stood still for a few seconds looking out, trying to find any movement, but I saw nothing but the garbage bags I had left earlier. I decided to open the door carefully, still holding the security chain, but as soon as the door opened, the sound stopped. The silence that came next was so sudden that it made me more nervous than the doorbell itself. I looked around, went down a step from the balcony, but there was no one on the street. Only the weak wind passing through the trees, without giving any explanation for what had just happened. I went back inside and locked everything immediately, but sleep was already gone. I sat on the couch staring at the door, waiting for the sound to come back. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang again, this time only once, long and dragged. I ran to the window, and once again the balcony was completely empty. At this point, I began to feel that it was directly linked to the strange request earlier. The next day, I checked the app again and found another disturbing detail. There was a new order scheduled for my address, scheduled for that same night. But I hadn't done anything. The history showed the same type of large meal, several portions, as if it were for a group of people. I canceled immediately, but I had the feeling that it wasn't over. That night, I was awake on purpose, waiting to see if something happened. And exactly at midnight, the doorbell rang again. I went to the window and saw the same bags of food left on the balcony, stacked as if someone had just put them on. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't see a car approaching, nothing. Just those bags in the same place as always. This time I didn't have the courage to open the door. I kept watching from the window for long minutes, until I noticed something even stranger. The bags began to move slightly, as if there was movement inside them. My heart shot, and I walked away from the window, trying not to look anymore. The doorbell didn't come back that night, but the bags remained on the balcony until dawn. When the sun rose, I had the courage to open the door. The bags were still there, but they were completely empty, as if they had never come full of food. No packaging, no leftovers, nothing. Only the folded paper bags, stacked on top of each other. There was no sign of who had left them, or how the dishes I had seen a few hours before disappeared. To this day I can't explain if it was some absurd error of the application or something much worse. I never used the same service again after that week. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard the doorbell ringing by itself. And you, what would you do if you received a whole meal that you never asked for, and after that, you were woken up by a bell with no one at the door? I worked for a while making deliveries at night, and one of the strangest routes I took was to an isolated house in a remote suburb. It was late, and the street was practically deserted, with few lights on in the neighboring houses. When I parked in front of the address, I got that strange feeling that something was not right. Still, I took the bag and went to the door. I knocked a few times, waiting for someone to come and answer. I waited a few seconds and nothing happened. I played again louder, and I still had no answer. The place was so quiet that even the sound of my steps echoed on the balcony. I was ready to get back to the car when I clearly heard heavy footsteps coming from inside the house, approaching the door towards where I was. I was paralyzed on the balcony, holding the bag, listening to the steps getting closer and closer. With each sound of the creaking floor, my heart accelerated more. Then, the doorknob began to turn slowly, as if someone was about to open it. I took a step back, expecting to see the door open at once, but suddenly the movement stopped. The silence returned so fast that it seemed impossible that there was someone in there. I called loudly, asking if there was anyone, but I didn't get an answer. I waited a few seconds, completely motionless, until I realized that I wouldn't hear anything else. The house seemed to have returned to the state of before, quiet, cold, with no signs of life. That's when I decided not to wait any longer. I put the bag on the floor, right in front of the door, and turned to run back to the car. As I ran to the car, I felt as if someone was watching me through the windows of the house. I didn't have the courage to look back. I just unlocked the door and rushed in, locking everything inside. My heart was beating so fast that it looked like it was going to come out of my mouth. I turned on the engine, and at the same moment, the balcony was illuminated by the headlights, and I could clearly see the bag still in the same place, motionless, in front of the closed door. I drove away as fast as I could, but even after a few blocks, I kept looking through the rearview mirror, hoping to see some silhouette appear behind me. The strange thing is that the application confirmed the delivery normally, as if everything had happened without any problem. There was no complaint, no refund request, nothing. Only the cold record of another finished race, while I was still shaking at the wheel. In the following days, I began to refuse any request that pointed to that region. Just seeing the name of the street on the app screen, I already felt a chill. The memory of the handle turning by itself, and the silence that took over soon after still haunted me. It didn't seem like a simple lack of response. It was as if someone had reached the door on purpose and decided not to open it. I told some delivery colleagues, and one of them said he had already heard stories about that address. Nobody wanted to go back there, and many already marked the place as refused whenever it appeared in the application. I never went back to that address. Even if they offered me double the rate, I wouldn't have the courage to stop on that balcony again. The memory of the slow steps approaching, the doorknob turning slowly, and then stopping in absolute silence still makes me on alert to this day. It didn't seem like an ordinary situation of a distracted customer. There was something wrong there, something I didn't want to be seen. To this day, whenever I pass through isolated houses in night deliveries, I remember that night. The feeling of being observed, without ever seeing who was on the other side, was one of the worst I've ever experienced at work. And you, would you have the courage to wait to see who would open that door after hearing footsteps and the doorknob moving by itself? I worked for a while as a sushi delivery man, and I've been through strange situations, but none like the one that happened on a summer night. I received a call for a house at the end of a dead end, in a region of the city that I didn't know very well. The address seemed normal on the map, so I accepted the request and followed the route without thinking too much. When I arrived, I parked in front of the indicated house and took the bag with the food. It was at this moment that the application screen updated itself, showing that the order had been canceled. I was strange because I was already at the place, and yet the notification said that there was no delivery to make. But when I looked up, I saw through the illuminated window the silhouette of someone standing behind the curtain watching me. At the time, I felt a strong chill run through my back. It wasn't just the idea of being watched, it was the way the figure remained motionless, as if he was waiting to see what I would do. I stood still for a few seconds, not knowing if I was knocking on the door or if I was just leaving. The app showed the order as non-existent, but I was sure that someone inside knew I was there. I decided to take a few steps back, still holding the bag, and at that moment I noticed the curtain moving slightly, as if the person had gotten even closer to the glass. The light in the room was still on, revealing only the static shadow behind the fabric. It was enough to make me give up any contact attempt. I put the sushi bag on the balcony step, just so I wouldn't be there any longer. I slowly returned to the car, trying not to turn my back completely to the window. The silhouette was still, following my every move. It was impossible not to feel that, if I faltered, that person would leave the house at any moment. When I got into the car and slammed the door, I waited a few seconds before starting the engine. It was at that moment that the light in the room suddenly went out, leaving the window dark. The contrast was so abrupt that it made me accelerate immediately, leaving the alley without looking back. The feeling was that, if I stayed one more second, I would see that door open. When I got to a busier street, I finally stopped to breathe. I took my cell phone to report the situation in the application, but another detail made me even more disturbed. There was no record of me having accepted that request. In the history, there was nothing, as if the race had never existed. This made me even more nervous, because it meant that it wasn't just an automatic cancellation. It was as if everything had been erased. In the following days, I became obsessed with trying to find that address on the map, but I couldn't find it again. Not even by the car's GPS, I could review the route I had taken. The more I tried, the more it seemed that that alley was not listed anywhere. The only thing left was the memory of that motionless figure behind the curtain, watching my every move. To this day, I don't know if that was some absurd error of the application, or something that should never have happened. The fact is that I was there, I saw that silhouette behind the curtain, and felt that someone was waiting for me, even if officially there was no request. I never accepted deliveries in alleys or dead-end streets again, especially at night. Whenever I remember that night, I wonder if I would have seen anything else if I had waited a few more minutes. Maybe the door had opened, maybe that figure had finally shown up. But, honestly, I prefer not to know. And you, would you still stand in front of an isolated house after the request disappears from the app, knowing that someone is watching you through the window? He made deliveries in a neighborhood away from the city, one of those with few houses scattered and almost no public lighting. It was already late at night when I arrived at the address indicated by the application. I parked the car, and as soon as I turned off the headlights, I saw a man standing at the gate of the house. He was completely motionless, just looking in my direction, as if he already knew I would get there. I took the bag and walked slowly to the entrance. At every step, I expected him to say something, ask for food, or at least move, but nothing happened. When I got closer, I realized that the gate was locked with a large padlock, making any access impossible. The man was still standing on the other side, fixing his eyes on me without saying a single word. For a moment, I stood still holding the bag, not knowing what to do. I asked out loud if he was the owner of the order, but he didn't answer anything. Not a gesture, not a nod, just that fixed and silent look. The silence of the street made the scene even more disturbing, as if there were only me and him in that place. With my breathing accelerated, I decided to put the bag on the floor, very close to the gate. The idea was for him to pick it up after I left. Still, I stayed there for a few more seconds, waiting for any reaction, but he didn't move. It was at that moment that fear took over, and I began to retreat slowly towards the car, without turning my back completely. When I finally got into the car, I looked through the rearview mirror, and he was still there, motionless, as if he hadn't even noticed that I had left. I started the engine, and at the same moment, I saw his head turn slowly, following the movement of the car. I didn't have time to think about anything else. I accelerated as fast as I could to get out of that deserted street. After a few minutes, when I was already on an illuminated avenue, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe he was just an eccentric customer, someone who didn't like to talk. But the image of the gate locked with a padlock didn't leave my head. If he was really waiting for the order, why didn't he unlock the gate? And even worse, how did he intend to get the bag? The next morning, I entered the application to confirm the delivery. The system marked the order as completed, without any complaints or refunds. This made me even more confused, because I had never seen that man move to get the food. It was as if everything had ended normally, but I knew that the scene from the night before had nothing in common. I commented on what happened with other delivery men, and one of them said he had already gone through strange situations in that same region. Stories of customers who never said anything, gates always locked, and even houses where no one attended, but then the application confirmed as delivered. This only increased my discomfort, because it meant it wasn't just something in my head. To this day, I don't forget that man's eyes, fixed on me, without blinking, without saying anything. The locked gate with a padlock was proof that something didn't make sense in that delivery. I never accepted requests in that area again, because the simple memory of the way he accompanied my car with his eyes is enough to leave me on alert. Whenever I think about that night, I wonder if it was really a customer, or if I ended up witnessing something I shouldn't. That immobility, the silence, and the locked gate left me with the feeling that there was something wrong there, something I will never understand. And you, would you have the courage to approach someone who keeps watching you in silence behind a closed gate? I worked the night shift, and that week the movement was heavier than usual. I remember well because it was already past 11 when I received the notification of an order. The address seemed common, a simple house in a quiet neighborhood with nothing special. When I arrived, I parked in front and took the bag to the front door. I knocked a few times, I waited a little, but no one answered. I found it strange, because usually customers already keep an eye on the application to pick up the order as soon as the delivery man arrives. I waited a few more minutes, looking around, but the street was empty, only a few houses with the lights off. I decided to leave the bag on the balcony and register it as delivered. I went back to the car thinking that, at most, the customer would show up later to pick it up. I drove for a few blocks, ready to take another race, when the cell phone vibrated again. To my surprise, it was another order for the same address, with exactly the same items. At the time I thought it was some system error. Maybe the customer had duplicated the order without realizing it. I decided to accept, since I was close, and went back to the same street. When I parked in front of the house for the second time, something immediately made me uncomfortable. The bag I had left before was still intact on the balcony, exactly in the same place. But now the door of the house was open, wide open, as if someone had left or was waiting for me. There was no sound coming from inside, just the darkness occupying the entrance. I stayed inside the car for a few seconds, staring at the scene. It was too strange, the bag still there, untouched, and the door open as if something had changed between one delivery and another. I took the new bag, went down slowly, and walked to the balcony. Each step seemed heavier, and I couldn't stop looking at the dark interior of the house. The feeling was that someone was watching me from the inside, but didn't make any movement to show themselves. I put the second bag next to the first and called loudly, trying to sound firm. Order delivered. My tone echoed inside the silent house, without any response. The only thing I heard was a snap coming from the floor, as if someone had taken a step inside. I froze in place for a few seconds, but the absence of any word made me retreat slowly, without taking my eyes off the open door. I went back to the car without running, but my heart was racing. As soon as I entered and closed the door, I kept watching through the rearview mirror. The two bags were still on the balcony, side by side, and the door remained open, motionless. For a moment, I thought about calling the app support and reporting the situation, but what would I say? That someone made the same request twice and left the house open without showing up to pick it up. I decided to stand still for a few minutes, trying to see if anyone showed up. But nothing happened. No shadow, no noise, nothing but the wide door and the bags there on the floor. The feeling was suffocating, as if that scene was an invitation for me to get out of the car and get in, even without being called. It was precisely this idea that made me even more nervous. I decided to start it and leave, but the moment I started the car I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The living room curtain moved, as if someone had pulled it discreetly to the side. You couldn't see any face, just the shadow of a quick movement. This was enough to confirm that there was someone inside, observing everything from the beginning. I accelerated, trying not to look in the rearview mirror anymore, but the image of the open door and the bags was engraved in my mind. It was impossible to understand why someone would make two identical requests and then simply stay hidden, without looking for anything. The silence of the street, added to that darkness behind the door, gave me the feeling that it was not only a strange delivery, but a trap waiting for me to stay too long on the balcony. When I arrived in a busier area, I parked the car to try to report the delivery through the app. But another detail gave me goosebumps. In the history, there was only one finalized order, the first. The second one, which I had just delivered, just didn't show up. It was as if it had disappeared from the system, with no record that it existed. I spent the rest of the night avoiding thinking about it, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me alone. Every time the cell phone vibrated with a new run, I remembered that house with the door wide open. I kept wondering if that was just an absurd error of the application, or if someone had really used the system as bait to attract me there. After that night, I never accepted deliveries to addresses in alleys or isolated streets. Whenever I see something similar, I cancel it on the spot. What marked me was not only the duplication of the request, but the certainty that there was someone inside the house, hidden behind that curtain, following my every step. The idea that maybe they would wait for me to hesitate and enter is something that still gives me chills. To this day, I don't know if that was a system error or if someone really used the application for something much more sinister. But I know it wasn't a coincidence. The duplicate order, the intact bag, and the open door proved it to me. And you, Would you have the courage to deliver to a house where the food is still untouched and someone is watching you without ever showing up? I worked delivering pizza, and one night I received a call to an old building in the city center. It was one of those low buildings with narrow corridors and dim lighting, which had already seen better days. When I arrived, I rang the intercom, and a male voice answered almost immediately. He spoke calmly, gave me detailed instructions to go up to the 4th floor, and told me to leave the delivery at the door of the apartment. I went up by elevator with the bag in my hand, mentally repeating the apartment number so as not to get lost. When the elevator door opened, I noticed that the corridor was dark, only with a few dim lights illuminating the path. When I arrived at the indicated door, I realized that it was ajar. There was no sound coming from inside, and the apartment was completely erased. I stood for a few seconds in front of the door, waiting to hear footsteps or some voice calling. I called out loud that it was the delivery. I lightly pushed the door and saw only an empty and dark space, without furniture, no sign of someone living there. The feeling that I had just entered a wrong place was immediate, but at the same time it was exactly the apartment that the man on the intercom had described. I decided not to take another step and went back to the elevator, with the bag still in hand. The corridor seemed quieter than before, and the noise of the elevator taking a long time to arrive only increased the tension. When I finally got to the hall, I went straight to the doorman to confirm the apartment. That's when he told me with all naturalness that floor had been unoccupied for months. At the time, I tried to argue that I myself had talked to someone on the intercom. The doorman shook his head and said that this was not possible, because the panel on that floor had been off since the last resident had moved. I had no reaction, holding the pizza still hot, while the information hammered into my head. If no one lived there, who gave me such detailed instructions? I decided to go back to the ordinance to confirm in the application system. The address was correct, the floor was really the room, and the order was listed as active. I showed everything to the doorman, but he just repeated that floor was empty. That's when I realized how shaky I was. It made no sense to be carrying a bag of food to an apartment that officially no longer existed. I left the building as fast as I could, but before getting into the car I couldn't resist looking up. The windows on the 4th floor were all dark, except for one, which had a sleek light SLE escaping. I stood for a few seconds trying to understand, until the curtain moved slightly, as if someone was inside watching. The pizza bag was still in my hand, and at that moment I was sure I didn't want to go back there. I put the order as undelivered in the application and left without looking back again. Along the way, I tried to find some logical explanation. Maybe the doorman was wrong, maybe someone had occupied the apartment without warning. But deep down, the voice through the intercom and the half-open door on the floor that was supposedly empty left me the feeling that it was not a common mistake. In the following days, I was wondering if I should report what happened to the delivery app, but how to explain something like that without seeming crazy. The race was listed in the system as active, and the address was still available, but I never wanted to go back to that building. I told a coworker, and she commented that she had already heard stories from delivery men who also received calls to places that were unoccupied. The part that haunts me the most to this day is remembering the naturalness of the voice on the intercom. It didn't sound like a recording or interference. It was someone real, describing exactly the way to the apartment. The detail of the half-open door, however, gives me chills whenever I remember. It wasn't just empty inside, it was as if someone had just left and let me in on purpose. After that night, I never accepted deliveries in old buildings without first confirming with the doorman. The simple fact of having climbed to a floor that was officially unoccupied made me realize how much this work can put us in situations that we can't explain. To this day, every time I pass through the center and see that building, I feel a chill just remembering the 4th floor. I could never find out who spoke to me on the intercom, nor who opened the door of that empty apartment. But I know I saw the light in the window and the curtain moving, and that wasn't imagination. Maybe there will never be an answer, but the memory remains vivid. And you, would you have the courage to go up to a floor that they say is unoccupied after receiving detailed instructions to deliver an order there? It was a rainy Saturday, and I was making deliveries throughout the city. I was already tired when the app sent me to a corner house in an older neighborhood. It looked like an ordinary delivery, nothing out of the ordinary. I parked the car, took the bag, and went to the door. When I rang the bell, a lady opened it almost immediately, but the first thing she said was that she hadn't asked for anything. I showed the application screen, and there it was clear. That address, that number, registered as active. She just shook her head and repeated that she hadn't asked for anything. I apologized, already a little embarrassed by the situation, and went back to the car still with the bag in my hand. But when I looked through the rearview mirror before starting, I almost let my heart stop. The same lady was now standing on the balcony, smiling and holding exactly the bag that I swore was still with me. I looked at the passenger seat just to be sure, and there was the bag with me, intact, exactly where I had put it when I left the door. My stomach turned at the time, because there was no way to explain that. I looked up again to the balcony, and the lady was still there, smiling as if nothing was wrong, with the identical bag swinging in her hand. I couldn't move for a few seconds, as if my body had crashed. The rain hit the windshield hard, and the image of her standing motionless seemed even more surreal. When I finally managed to react, I geared and left there quickly without looking back again. But the feeling was that, at any moment, she could appear in the middle of the street, right in front of the car. I drove a few blocks until I stopped on a busy avenue, where the lights and movement made me feel a little safer. I took my cell phone to report what happened in the application, but another strange detail made me even more nervous. The order was no longer in the system. It was as if it had never existed, no record in the history, no charge, nothing. It just disappeared. I looked again at the bag next to me, trying to understand what was happening. I opened it slowly, hoping to find something strange, but inside there was exactly the meal described in the order, hot food packaged normally. The simple fact of looking so common only made the situation more disturbing, because there was nothing to justify what I had seen on the balcony minutes before. In the following days, I was left with that scene hammering in the head. I could swear that I had seen the same lady twice, in two places at the same time, one telling me that she had not asked for anything, and another, seconds later, smiling with the bag in her hand. Every time I remembered her smile, still and fixed, it gave me a chill. It wasn't a normal smile, it seemed almost forced, as if it had been put there just to scare me. I told some delivery colleagues, but everyone laughed and said I was probably too tired. But I knew what I had seen, and it was not an illusion caused by the rain or the rush. The bag was still with me in the car, intact, and yet there was a perfect copy of it on the balcony. This detail was impossible to ignore, and left me sleepless just thinking about it. After that day, I never accepted deliveries to that region again. The simple fact of passing by a corner house on rainy nights already makes me tense. The memory of the lady standing on the balcony, smiling with the bag in her hands, is still as vivid as the night it happened. I always wonder if, instead of leaving, I had come back to confirm. What would I have found inside? I've never received a logical explanation, and maybe I'll never. But since then, every time I deliver food at night, I look twice in the rearview mirror before leaving, as if I expected to see someone watching me. And you, what would you do if you saw someone holding the same delivery that was still in your hands?